Most search and rescue stories end one of two ways. The first way, they find the missing person alive. Dehydrated, hypothermic, disoriented, maybe injured, but alive. And the search team brings them out, and the family cries, and everybody goes home exhausted and grateful, and the missing person spends a few days in the hospital and eventually goes back to their life. The second way, they don't find them alive. Those are the two ways it ends. That's the whole list. What I'm about to tell you doesn't fit either one. Marcus Webb has been on the Smythe County Search and Rescue Team for 11 years. He's been on more than 60 searches in the Mount Rogers National Recreation Area and the surrounding mountains. He's seen both endings. He knows how this works. On the third day of a search for a missing hiker named Claire Alton, 31 years old, solo backpacker, overdue by 48 hours, Marcus found her. Alive, physically unharmed, sitting in a clearing like she'd been waiting. That's the good ending. That's the one everybody wants. Except on the drive out, Marcus started noticing things Claire was saying that she had no way of knowing. Things about the search. Things you could only know if you'd been watching it from somewhere above the whole time. Pull up a chair. The fire's going. The wrong feeling started before she opened her mouth. Marcus Webb would say that later when he tried to explain it to people who hadn't been there. Tried and mostly failed because the feeling was not the kind of thing that survived translation into ordinary language. It was not a feeling with a name. It was more like a temperature. A change in the air around the clearing, the way the air changes before a storm, that drop in pressure your body registers before your brain does. He'd pushed through the laurel thicket on the eastern slope of Elk Garden Ridge at approximately 2:15 p.m. on the third day of the search, and the clearing had been there. A flat open space, maybe 30 feet across, the grass pale and winter dry, ringed by spruce on 3 sides and the laurel thicket on the 4th. And Claire Alton had been sitting in the middle of it. Sitting, not lying, not curled on her side in a hypothermic stupor, not collapsed against a tree. Sitting upright, cross-legged, her pack beside her, her hands resting open on her knees. Like she'd been waiting. Like she'd known he was coming and had arranged herself for his arrival. Marcus stopped at the edge of the clearing. He stood there for a moment, just a moment, 2 or 3 seconds, before he identified himself and moved toward her. 2 or 3 seconds where the wrong feeling was at its strongest before training took over, and training was loud enough to push everything else down. He identified himself. He crossed the clearing. He crouched in front of her and did the assessment, eyes tracking, responsive to questions, skin color normal, no obvious injuries, no signs of hypothermia despite 2 nights in October temperatures. She said her name. She said the date. She said she was fine. She said she was fine 3 times before he asked her once. He got her moving within 10 minutes. That was protocol. You found someone, you assessed them, you got them moving toward the extraction point. You didn't linger. The longer you stayed in the field, the more variables you introduced, and variables got people hurt. Claire Alton moved well. No limping, no favoring, no shortness of breath on the uphill sections. She carried her own pack. She answered his questions in a clear, organized way. Her name, her age, where she lived, what she'd eaten, when she'd last had water. All of it correct, all of it delivered with a composure that Marcus noted and filed away. Most people, when you found them after 3 days, cried, or couldn't stop talking, or went somewhere internal and quiet, the psychological aftermath of sustained fear working through their system. Claire Alton did none of those things. She walked beside him on the trail and answered his questions and occasionally asked her own. That was the first thing he noticed, the questions. Not the content of them, not yet, just the fact of them. People who'd been lost for 3 days didn't usually ask questions. They answered questions. They let you lead. The asking was a particular cognitive function, an outward-directed attention that most survivors in the first hours needed time to recover. Claire Alton was asking questions within 15 minutes of being found. How many people were on the search team? He told her, 12, across 3 sectors. Were they using dogs? 2 dog teams, yes, but they'd been pulled to the north sector yesterday when they got a hit on a scent trail that turned out to be a false lead. She nodded at that, like she knew, like she was confirming something rather than learning it. He filed that away too. They were 40 minutes out from the extraction point when it cracked open. They'd been moving in comfortable silence for a stretch. The trail was narrow here, single file, and Marcus had let the conversation lapse while he navigated a rocky section. When the trail widened again and Claire came up beside him, she said, "The woman searcher, the one with the red pack, is her ankle okay?" Marcus stopped walking. He turned and looked at Claire. "What?" "The woman with the red pack," Claire said. "She turned her ankle on the second day, on the north slope. I saw her. She was limping for a while." Marcus looked at her. Sarah Denton, his teammate. She had turned her ankle on the second day. A minor roll on a wet route, nothing serious. She'd taped it and kept going. It wasn't in any report. It wasn't something that had been radioed. It was the kind of small team-internal thing that didn't make it out of the field. He said, "How you know about that?" Claire's expression didn't change. That was the thing about her expression. It hadn't really changed since he'd found her in the clearing. It had been neutral and composed in a way that he'd initially read as shock and was now beginning to read as something else. "I saw her," she said. "You saw her?" "On the north slope. She was working the switchbacks above the creek drainage. She rolled her ankle on a root and stopped and taped it." "When?" "Yesterday morning, maybe 10 o'clock. Marcus thought about the north slope, the switchbacks above the creek drainage, where Sarah had been working at 10 o'clock yesterday morning, where Claire Alton, by every search grid they'd run, had not been. "Claire," he said carefully, "the north slope is 4 miles from where I found you. The search grid shows no sign of you anywhere near the north slope." She looked at him. "I know," she said. "So how did you see her?" She was quiet for a moment, not uncomfortable quiet, not the quiet of someone searching for a lie, more like the quiet of someone deciding how much of a true thing to say. "I could see a lot of things from where I was." "Where were you?" She looked up, a brief, specific look, not at the sky, not vaguely upward, but at a particular angle, the way you look at something you know the location of. Then she looked back at the trail and started walking. "I'm not sure I can explain it. Let's keep moving." He should have pressed it then. He knew that later. He should have stopped her and made her explain what she meant by, "I could see a lot of things from where I was," and "I'm not sure I can explain it." He should have sat her down on the trail and worked through it methodically, the way he'd been trained to do with survivors who were withholding information about what had happened to them. He didn't. He kept moving. He told himself it was protocol. Get her out, get her assessed, let the debrief handle the details. He told himself she was still in recovery mode, and pushing her would do more harm than good. He told himself a lot of things that let him keep walking without asking the question he didn't want the answer to. The question being, if she was 4 miles from where he'd found her, watching Sarah Denton tape her ankle at 10 o'clock yesterday morning, where exactly had she been standing? And how had no one seen her? And why hadn't she come down? She knew about the dog team. That came 20 minutes later. She asked whether they'd figured out what threw the dogs off on the north sector, whether it had been a deer trail or something else that pulled the scent. Marcus had not said anything about what had pulled the scent. He had not mentioned that the dogs had followed something on the north sector and then lost it abruptly at the ridgeline, which the handlers had found unusual enough to note in their report. He asked her how she knew the dogs had been thrown off. She said she'd watched them work the north sector from above. She said they were good dogs. She said the one with the blue harness had the better nose, but the handler for the red harness dog was more experienced and kept her on task better. He didn't say anything. She described the blue harness dog's handler by his jacket color and approximate height. The description was accurate. He kept walking. She knew about the base camp. This one hit him harder than the others because base camp was not in the field. Base camp was the command post at the Elk Garden trailhead, Tents, equipment, the incident command setup, the folding tables with the maps and the radios, and the coffee that someone's wife had brought in a 30-cup percolator on day 2 because the team was going to be out there a while. Claire described the maps, the way they were laid out, the sectors marked in different colors, the coffee percolator. She described a conversation. 2 of his teammates, he knew immediately who she meant from the description, had argued on the evening of day 2 about whether to call in an additional dog team from Roanoke. One of them thought the terrain in the south sector was too thick for the dogs they had. The other thought adding a team would slow the coordination. They'd gone back and forth for 10 minutes before the incident commander had made the call to hold with what they had. Marcus had been present for that conversation. He had not mentioned it to anyone outside the team. It had not been recorded or transmitted. It had happened at a folding table at the Elk Garden trailhead at approximately 8 p.m. on day 2. He stopped walking. Claire, she stopped, turned to look at him. The base camp is at the trailhead. It's a 2-mile hike from the nearest point in your search grid. How do you know what happened at base camp? She looked at him for a long moment. The light was going. The sun was behind the ridge, and the trail was filling with the blue-gray dusk light that came early in the mountains in October. In that light, her face was very still and very calm, and her eyes were, he would struggle with this later, trying to describe it. Her eyes were not frightened, had not been frightened since he'd found her. Most survivors had fear somewhere in them, even the composed ones, even the ones who'd held it together. It lived in the eyes even when everything else was controlled. Claire Alton's eyes had no fear in them. They had something else, something he didn't have a word for, a quality of distance, maybe, of great altitude, of a perspective that took in more than a human field of vision should be able to hold. Claire, she said. She used his name. He hadn't told her his name. Marcus, I'm okay. I promise you I'm okay. Can we just get to the trailhead? He looked at her. He thought about the clearing, the way she'd been sitting when he found her, the arrangement of it, the composure, the 3 times she'd said she was fine before he asked once. He thought about looking up, the way she'd looked up when he asked where she'd been, not at the sky, at a specific point, at something she knew the location of. He thought about 3 days in the Mount Rogers backcountry, October temperatures, no fire ring at the campsite, no sign of a camp anywhere near the clearing, no footprints on the trail leading to the clearing. He'd noted that at the time and filed it under Survivor Adrenaline, Unexpected Approach Route. He pulled the file back out now and looked at it differently. No footprints on the trail leading to the clearing. Okay, he said, let's get to the trailhead. She was checked out by the EMTs at the trailhead. Vital signs, normal. Temperature, normal. Blood pressure, normal. No signs of exposure, dehydration, or injury. The EMT, Marcus watched this from 20 feet away, kept checking things twice, the way you do when the numbers don't match the situation. 3 days in the October backcountry, and she presented like someone who'd been inside. Her family came, her mother and a man Marcus took for a brother, driving up fast on the access road, the headlights swinging through the dark. Her mother held her for a long time. The brother stood back and watched with an expression Marcus couldn't read from where he stood. Claire, over her mother's shoulder, looked at Marcus. She held his eyes for a moment. Then she looked up, the same angle as before, that specific skyward look, not vague, but directed, aimed, and something moved across her face. Not a smile, something quieter, something that looked like acknowledgement. Like she was looking at something that was still up there, like she was letting it know they'd made it out. Marcus looked up. The Elk Garden trailhead was clear and very dark and full of stars. The ridgeline cut a black edge across the lower sky. The spruce trees stood along the ridge in a dark, uneven line. He looked at the tree line for a long time. He didn't know what he was looking for. He didn't know if he wanted to find it. He wrote his after-action report that night. Standard form, timeline, grid sectors, find location, survivor condition at time of find, extraction route, and time. He wrote it the way he always wrote them, factually and without editorializing. He left out the conversation on the trail. He left out the things she'd known, the ankle, the dog teams, the base camp, the argument about the Roanoke dogs, his name. He left all of it out. He wasn't sure why. He told himself it was because he didn't know how to write it in a way that would be useful. He told himself it was because survivors said strange things, and without a clear explanation, there was nothing actionable in the report. He told himself a lot of things. What he didn't tell himself, what he kept from the part of his mind that wrote reports and followed protocol and had been doing this for 11 years, was the real reason. The real reason was the look she'd given him at the end, over her mother's shoulder, the look up at the ridge, at the specific point above the tree line, the acknowledgement, letting it know they'd made it out. If he put the conversation in the report, he'd have to explain what he thought it meant, where he thought she'd been for 3 days, what he thought had been watching the search from above the tree line, watching the dog teams, watching the base camp, watching Sarah Denton tape her ankle on the north slope, what he thought had brought her back, and why. He wasn't ready to write those answers down. He wasn't sure he'd ever be ready, because writing them down meant they were real, and if they were real, then everything he thought he knew about what could be lost in those mountains and what could be found needed to be rebuilt from the ground up. He saved the report, closed the laptop, sat at his kitchen table in the dark. Outside, the mountains held their shape against the sky, the same as they always had, the same as they would tomorrow. Somewhere up on the ridge, in the spruce and the dark, something looked down at the lights of the valley below. Marcus Webb did not go back to the Mount Rogers search area for 4 months. When he did, he told himself it was because the next search required it. He told himself he wasn't looking for the clearing. He wasn't sure he believed himself. He never found it. Claire Alton went home with her family that night. Marcus Webb checked on her once, about a month later, a phone call. She answered on the second ring, sounded completely normal, warm even, grateful. She thanked him for finding her. He almost asked her. He had the question ready. He'd been carrying it for a month. He almost put it into words. He didn't. Because here's the thing, and this is the part that keeps me up at night thinking about this story. Marcus didn't ask because he realized, halfway through the silence before the question, that he wasn't sure he was talking to the same person he'd found in that clearing. Not because she sounded different, because she sounded exactly the same. The same composure, the same calm, the same quality in her voice that he'd noticed from the first moment in the clearing and hadn't been able to name. He said goodbye. He hung up. He never called again. If this one got into you, if you're going to think differently about what it means to be found, subscribe to Virginia Wild and hit the bell so you don't miss a single story. Drop a comment below. I want to know, when Marcus looked up at the ridge at the end, what do you think was up there? I read every comment. I don't always answer, but I read them. The fire's still going. Come back soon.